Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ruby, for agreeing to talk to us today in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. How's it been for you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been, I feel guilty, but it's been quite nice actually. I've had lots of time to work on projects and get things finished that usually would be just kind of crammed in an hour here, an hour there within my life. But I've been able to take full days to do stuff, which has been a real luxury actually. But I'm kind of also aware of how lucky I am and we are to be in these situations compared to so many others in other countries, and also people here who don't have as much. So yeah, interesting place to be in.
Yeah, because I know there's a lot of stress for the creative community at the moment, because people you're a music therapist, aren't you? So I guess you have income from that, but people that have creativity as their main form of income, it's been quite a hard time for them.
Yeah, I think in some ways I'm really lucky that I have kind of a few different disciplines. I think if I didn't have that, I'd be in a really difficult position. I lost a lot of gigs, a lot of music work. And writing festivals as well. And the kind of lead up to lockdown, I lost a lot of money and a lot of work. And a lot of things I was really proud of and really looking forward to, like Auckland Writers Festival was a real blow. Yeah. But as well, it's because I've had these other things to fall back on. I've managed to secure quite a lot of writing work during this time. So I've been doing writing for different projects every day, which has been a really nice change to kind of try out that life as a whole life instead of just a little compartment. It's been quite nice.
Oh, that's great. Paul, did you want to start with some of your questions?
I guess my questions were about sort of the writing side of things a bit more. So like one of the things I noticed just with doing a bit of sort of research first was how you've talked about storytelling as part of music therapy and telling your own story in music therapy, as well as writing obviously in a more public sort of way as well. And I guess I was just sort of interested in the similarities and the differences for you with those sort of not two different types, but those two sort of spaces to write in.
Yeah, definitely. I think that being able to kind of tell stories and write stories, whether they're fiction or not, and poetry comes into that side of it where we never really know if it's fiction, autofiction, non-fiction, which makes it probably, to me, the most interesting genre, because you never know how much of it is true. There's a real power in being able to tell your own stories, and your stories, even if they're not your own, will always be influenced by your own. So I feel there's a real sense of power and a sense of autonomy in that. And then within music and music therapy, especially within improvisation, there's kind of an ability to communicate something wordlessly, which is somehow tied to writing, even though they're completely different apart from that side in the middle where they communicate. So I was talking to a friend this morning about the things that we can't do during COVID as musicians, and the music therapy came into the conversation too, about kind of how improvising isn't there now. And that's, to me, improvising is like you're communicating something and someone else is communicating something, and you could be communicating two different things, thinking about two different things, but they kind of can still speak to each other, and everyone can decide what that conversation is if they want to look at it in a narrative sense. So for me, those things kind of come across there. And reading someone's work can be like that too. You know, that whole kind of subjectivity idea, which plays out in all writing, but especially in poetry, I think. And the idea that someone else can read the same piece at the front, but your reading behind is going to be completely different.
Yeah. It's interesting.
We've been talking. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
Just in terms of improvisation with music, that idea of not being able to sort of replicate that with Zoom and in that kind of digital format so much. And I guess that's sort of not phrased very well as a question, but just sort of wondering how much of that is possible with the sort of technology.
It's pretty tricky, because all of the things we have at the moment are largely like when someone's talking, that's the sound that's coming through. You can't have two things going at the same time.
course.
So
Yeah.
it kind of removes that live side of it. But I've done some work. There's a project coming out where different Wellington musicians are recording. You record a track and then it's passed on to someone else and they record a track over the top. And it keeps going. It's like a round robin, exquisite corpse sort of thing.
Yeah. Nice.
And so I did one of those, and Al Fraser, actually, who used to work at libraries, was on. Yeah, he's one of my homies. Was on my track, so he was number one, and I was number two. And then we had Michelle Velvin, who's a she's been married recently, so I can't remember her new name. I don't know Michelle. And the harp, and then Nico and Milo. Nico Tahuki, I don't know Milo's name, sorry Milo, doing kind of effects and stuff afterwards and bird song and other things. And that was really awesome too, to have that new experience of improvising where it's not in one time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really hard to kind of make a synthetic form of improvising. Yeah.
You get that magic of the exquisite corpse where you sort of open it up at the end.
Yeah.
It's quite cool.
Totally. It was really interesting, and to see each layer of it as well was really neat. Yeah.
That does sound really fun. Also, know that you've recently been working on a project called Pōneke in terms of performing in a sort of a particular space and that sort of relationship between.
Oh, I think you're frozen, Paul.
It's frozen.
He's frozen. There we go. You were frozen for a little while, Paul. You might need to say that again.
We're talking about Pōneke. Do you want me to talk to that for a bit?
If you'd like, yeah. Otherwise, we can just do the other areas. But if you
yeah. So Pōneke, kind of idea around that. There's a few ideas around it, and one is kind of looking at environment as a player within music and with art in general. That we kind of often ignore. We kind of often ignore the taha of te taia within our work, even though it's something that's always there. So and within the taonga pūoro kind of philosophy and tradition, like the environment is where you learn your kind of way of playing from. Like if you're a jazz musician, you listen to great jazz musicians. In taonga pūoro, we listen to great taonga pūoro players and to the internal, but we also listen to. Speaking of which, there's a bird on top of my shed. I knew that was going to happen. Tin roof noise. It's this bird. This is a great part of the conversation to have.
Yeah. Perfect time.
Hey, thanks so much. So it records taonga pūoro in response to different environments. So around Wellington, different places, and then I layered up cello on top of that at home. And so that's all finished now, and it's coming up possibly during lockdown or matariki, just depending on how things get sorted. And yeah, that's been a really, really fun, quite a long-term project because it just kind of snowballed, and I ended up doing like a piece of art and a poetry response to each track as well. So it comes with like a book that you can go through and match all the things up. And it looks at hidden histories as well, kind of idea of all these places and how we whakapapa to different places. For example, Kāti Māmoe, who are one of the iwi, they're a separate iwi from Tahu, but kind of all intermarry and intermingle, come under that wider body of Waitaha in kind of a framework sense at this point. So they were in Wellington on their way as they travelled down to Te Waipounamu. So I have whakapapa to Kāti Māmoe, so I can kind of trace where parts of me have been at different points in history around Wellington. So it does a lot of work with that as well.
Because I think that, like, for me, when you were talking about how different people will read a poem differently, and we were talking earlier, Paul and I, about 6 feet for a single and 8 feet for a double, and how we both read that. And for me, being Māori, it's kind of like the things that I got from it were probably quite different to what Paul got from it. And I was talking about how I love it at the end where you make that little reference to the whakatauki at the very end, and how and I was thinking about when I also read the piece that you wrote for E Tangata about identity and blood quantum and that kind of thing. It's an amazing piece. It's real. I think like probably a lot of people would either find it an eye-opener or something that they could relate to. Do you find that in the poetry world that there's a similar kind of distinction? Do you get, like, do you have any qualms about like having to justify your identity or justify how you write and what you write?
Yeah, this is so interesting. I think a lot of it is more internal than external in poetry. I think that there is definitely an attitude that Māori poetry is trendy right now.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because it's not like people suddenly decided to write or suddenly decided to be Māori. It's a really interesting thing to bring up. It's bizarre. I mean, but so that's always there. And I feel like if ever I achieve something quite decent, there's always a few kind of comments around like, this is why that's been achieved.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I did a podcast recently with with the Shift Collective, which are teenage girls in Wellington. They were looking at role models, and they wanted to interview me, which I thought was hilarious. Like the day they sent me, I was having this day that was just a train wreck, and it was like from Jandal from the op shop to Waitaha because I locked myself out of my house, and I bought a pie for lunch because I left my FPOS card at home, and then I got the email like on my phone that I dropped the day before and cracked it, and it's like, you're a role model. Which was hilarious. But yeah, I think there's always this thing where people think that you've just suddenly done well, and they don't see. Like I recently someone from Minarets got in touch with me, the journal and publishing company, and they were having a quick chat to me, and I published my first piece with them when I was 16, kind of beginning to be an adult, and like I've been doing this for quite a while now, and I've got a long way to go, and I think everybody does, and that's part of the beauty of writing and certain areas of music, like you can keep going till you drop. But but it's interesting. People kind of think that this is trendy right now, so I think that's always there. But I think the questioning to be there is really interesting. And I think Tahu have real interesting kind of things around it. Like I feel like growing up in the North Island, like I feel like my identity definitely changes depending on my location and people around. But I think doing that research into kind of whakapapa stuff and location and all those kind of things really helped with that. Yeah, I think so for projects that I do that aren't kind of for money, I've got to get out of them myself, or else I'm not going to do them. So the album was kind of like, I want to explore this place. I'm going to be here for a long time. I want to feel connected to it. I want to play more with the natural environment. These are the things I wanted and all things that I did through that. And I feel like it made me more connected and a better person in some ways by doing it. It was kind of the same. Yeah.
I think that's one of the beauties of whakapapa, though, isn't it? It gives us those connections, and we can connect into lots of different things about the whenua and the land as well as ourselves. And so that's a real strength that we have when we approach things. And
I think there's as many ways to be Māori as there are tangata Māori as well.
I know,
And the other thing is in that poem, I've had a few Māori people message me and be like, people eat in a graveyard in this poem, and that is a huge no-no, and they get really like poha about it. And I was like, yeah, Dad's Māori, but that was also his work, and he had a 20-minute break and had sandwiches in a graveyard because by the time he left, went out and he was digging all day. It's like that whole tikanga changes depending on the situation. I'm not going to take that out to try pretend things were more to-do than they were.
I know, and that's the thing, because I think we all have our own experiences, and like you say, there's as many Māori as there are people, and I think that's one of the nice things about poems like this, is that they they give us that explanation for how things are in the world. And and I love the way that I know I've read about you that family and and Māori identity is how we become people comes a lot through our families, and that your collection you've been working on is called Tōku Papa. And so one of the things I like about 6 Feet for a Single is that that being with your family and being with your parents is how we learn about things. And so I like the way that in it the father's digging, but he's child minding as well. So he's sending the child off to look for the lamb, look for the clasped hands. but also you're observing that relationship to the earth, like when you're talking about his body digging and the reverberations from the earth up through the spade into him. I just think that's a really, those images are so everyday, but you've conveyed them with really, in a simple, beautiful way that how we learn is by being with our family and observing things.
Completely. And I think that through colonization, there's so much, we lost the most visible things first. And it's all those kind of invisible things. Like I talk about Hall's model all the time, but kind of like looking at the top is parts of culture you can see, like food, traditional dress, language. And underneath you've got like perceptions of self, connection to language, parenting styles, other things. And parenting styles are really hard to kill off. So and my dad was raised by his grandparents for a chunk of time as well. So he's kind of almost got that thing where he's raised by an older generation for a bit, and he's really confident in him. And so it's really interesting to kind of see people who will say that they're quite very disconnected with their Māoritanga, but then they'll completely have had very Māori upbringings.
That's right.
Yeah. That's straight away what comes out. It's really interesting. So kind of investigating that a lot.
I love that. I think it's a real strength in those poems, and your poems. I love it. Yeah. Paul, I feel like I'm dominating. Do you have
No. I guess I was also just thinking in terms of the poem you wrote for the Ihimātao collection as well, and especially how it came together quite quickly, I think, didn't it?
Yeah, so that was organised by a group of my friends. I'm really lucky to have a really kind of strong cohort of young Māori and a lot of young Māori takatapui writers as well. And that's made my quality of life so much higher kind of before that. So Sinead Overby, Michelle Rahurahu, and Esa May Ranapiri, and Hannah Pera Awaki as well was on that project, who I don't know as well, but the other three are my homies. And so it was really intense, and it was really kind of, you've got a short amount of time to write about it. But I think that the whole dispute and that whole whenua there and all of the things that echoes for everyone who's Māori, or everyone who has a level of displacement or a level of things, the ground being taken from under them, had things that they could resonate with and put in that writing. And that writing is just so, that Te Rito o Te Harakeke is so amazingly diverse. It really proves that point that what is Māori writing? It's writing by Māori authors. Like every poem in that book are completely different. I really enjoyed that prompt. And I have really cool memories from that time, because I was part of the kind of extended whānau of that group that were helping like sew the books and things like that.
Oh, wow.
I have all these memories of us like sitting around at 11 o'clock at night drinking 3 litres, like doing all these books, and it was really lovely. It was, I remember sitting around thinking like, this is something I'm going to remember a really long time, and this is what I'm going to remember of part of this time period, is us sitting around and doing this. And it's really interesting, the things that you can tell are going to stick with you, and
and at very time, right, that it's going to have that impact. Definitely.
It was interesting too, because around that time was it last year or the year before? I feel like COVID has thrown out my,
I know,
so
I don't know, the last 3 years into one big smush. Around that time I was kind of still studying. Was I still studying? Oh no, I was working, but I just started working. So I just finished my master's, and so I'd been doing a lot of work around kind of kaupapa Māori theory and things like that. But then I kind of started realizing that I kind of had two areas of stuff. I had like decolonial stuff and then kaupapa Māori things. So there's kind of angry stuff coming up there, and which is funny, because I have had feedback like that before, particularly from Pākehā, being like, hey, I don't really understand this, is angry for no reason.
Oh, really?
And sometimes it's interesting, because like sometimes it's like, oh, well, maybe, like I read lots of books that I can tell aren't for me, so I just stop reading them. Like, oh, I don't get this, and I don't think I'm meant to, so I'll finish it. But it's like, it's that real interesting thing about audience, where that some people just assume that they're always going to be the audience. So
Yeah.
I think
I
we
had
need to
like,
that.
That's really interesting.
Because I love that about your poems, that you don't have to give an explanation for, like it's more normalization of Māori language and Māori, topics and things like that, is that your poems don't give an explanation. So if you don't know what those words mean or what those concepts are, well, it's up to you to go away and find out about it. You're not going to give an explanation in your poems. And I love that. It's great.
That's cool. I think that I do try to write things. I don't try to write things excessively, but I think it happens just because with my job, that's how I'm used to communicating. Like I'm used to needing to communicate really big concepts quite simply so that they can process. So I didn't really try to channel that through. But yeah, it'll be interesting over time to see if I get to a point where I need to explain those things more, or because I think you can do a lot of work, and a lot of Māori writers are really skilled at writing for two audiences at once, because most of us have Māori and other whakapapa as well.
That's right. Yeah.
So we're really good at having to do this. It's hard, but we're good at having to do this two worlds navigating, and we're good at being able to use all these things we know about one world to put in one other thing to make people know what that is.
Yeah.
Patricia Grace time, right?
And I think for a long time, when we've got those, double identities where we have more than one ethnicity running through us, for a long time it's been seen as something that's hard to navigate. But I think more and more it's becoming a strength, and we can really, use that to, like you say, walk between two worlds, or for some people walk between 2 or 3 worlds or more. Yeah. And it's, that's it's a real strength. And it's that classic kind of code switching, how we can kind of adapt to any situation. And so you become really adept with language. And I think as a poet, do you think that's something that gives you, like that ability to create with words?
Yeah, definitely. I think that being kind of, I always said biracial growing up, but now I think I don't even know what I say anymore. The language around it is changing and developing, being reclaimed, debunked all the time. But I think being someone with whakapapa Māori and with other whakapapa as well, including, Jewish whakapapa and Irish whakapapa, those things, I think I'm used to doing that code switching, and I'm used to, it's almost like I've been practicing writing for a long time, just to exist in those spaces, which is really interesting, and in some ways it's kind of sad, but also it has been useful for me. Yeah, and I think that it's good to be able to talk across those spaces. And it's also it's good to be able to write things for those specific audiences as well. Like I often think about this with Tahu things, because when I grew up in the North Island, all of our myths, as they should be, were kind of centered on local iwi. So where I live was Tūwharetoa, Te Arawa, and so that's kind of where a lot of the mythology in my brain sits. But definitely a big chunk that's Tahu mythology, and they kind of interweave quite a lot. And now I try to kind of put the Tahu things in more. And that's when I'm kind of like, I was doing a piece for Kāti Pai Press. I was editing it the other day, and like I used takaroa instead of tangaroa, and talked about his wife. And I was thinking like, and they were like, do you want to do this? And I was like, oh man, I wonder how this is going to come across, because like I think that there's a real, you don't want to trip up the reader having them like, no, this isn't the story I know, because like if you're only out of information, you're so defensive of that information. But also it's nice to be able to get those, like all those nuances that aren't just like te ao kaitahu, te ao Ngāti Kahu, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's awesome. So did you want to read something for us, or play something, or what would you like to do?
I can read something. I've got Arrival and 6 Feet. Shall we read Arrival, since it's in the in the thingy reader?
Oh yes, in the VUP.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Okay. Arrival. I have an auntie who says she remembers what it's like to be born. She describes a feeling of warmth and a blinding of light, like staring into the sun. For many, it's hard to imagine a life before we exist, but not for us who walk backwards into our futures. The past getting smaller and smaller, like being driven away from your first home, looking behind you out the back windscreen, the trees waving you on to the cities where your family name is nothing but sounds rolling around the mouth and through the lips. We believe the spirit is formed when the eyes develop in utero, our two waters mingling in a river encased with sinew and skin. Ancient knowledge from a waka so sacred that those aboard did not eat, that the women were left behind to weep on the beaches, piercing the sound barrier with walls of sacrifice for the greater good. I know that Auntie was lying. Before arrival, I remember a darkness, like being underwater at night, then a sense of deep knowing, and then fear. Nothing but fear.
Oh, Tahu, that's beautiful. Thank you. I like the tui in the background as well.
Yeah, we have this really aggressive tui at our house that's lived here for several years, whose name is Big Boy, and he scares off all the other birds, and he's just taken to throwing things at us. It's quite. He just like swipes above the path and will pick up these berries and just biff them quite violently.
I love that connection between arrivals. I think that's, I love the way that poem conveys that, different types of arrivals.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that last line, every time I read it or just heard it, always sort of captures me as well. And sort of unexpectedly.
Yeah, well, the book kind of, I really like the idea of poetry books kind of having like a narrative through them in some sense. And so this kind of starts with my parents meeting and then me showing up. It's like, it's very, very self-obsessed. And then, and then kind of my relationship with my dad when I'm a child, and then me when I'm a teenager, and then kind of through on. And so, yeah, that's that real kind of part where one part definitely becomes another part. So, yeah.
And that's out next year, though, isn't it? The
yeah.
Okay.
That's
cool.
out next year, which is exciting. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, and it's cool to have it kind of being announced with the reader coming out as well, which is really neat, because I was kind of in this weird in between stage where it had been accepted, but it wasn't kind of announced properly yet. So I was telling people, but also kind of
You want that sort of oomph.
Yeah, it was really exciting to be accepted by VUP. It's really it's a huge dream of mine, actually, because I've always been a big fan of VUP, and even as a kid I remember kind of gravitating towards their books, and so it's a real cool thing to go with them.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
I guess I just had one last question that I'd been thinking of was, when you're when you're writing poetry, how different is it to the process when you're writing music? What's
I think it comes from a similar place, definitely. And I think that I'm kind of terrible, and quite often I'll either need a prompt or need to have workbook to make something, which is, I think it's more like a time thing than a choice, or like it makes sense to do that. But so that works for me with both mediums. But I think with writing, there's kind of like you're communicating something that you know people are gonna be able to read, but with music you don't necessarily know if people are going to be able to read it like in the same way, if people are going to understand what that represents. Like they might feel it but not know what they're feeling, and I think that that's a really interesting thing to kind of play with and think about. And I think that as kind of time's gone on, I think more and more now about what I write and how that affects people who read it or who are in it in some way. I think as a therapist I really have to think about that, because we sign so many codes. Is like which is interesting, because I talked to my dad about the book. I was like, I'm writing this book, and he's like, oh yeah, that's cool, that's fine. Yeah, but he was totally fine about it. He was like, yeah, no, you're no good, as long as it's the true thing. Yeah, good. And I okay, sweet. And I grew up being quite Like whenever I was published in a journal, I did lots of the redraft books when I was a kid as well. And I'd always get one and take it home to my dad and be like, hey, here's this. And he'd be like, oh, cool. And he'd put it on the table. It was like a stack of them on the table. And he just know. And I'd be so pissed off. I would spend the whole week. Years later, I gave him one and I was like, oh, cool. So here's this. Are you going to read it or not? And he's like, he goes, oh, I don't need to read them. I already know they're good. And I was like, oh, cool. And it's kind of this interesting thing where I know he probably won't read it. But I want that if he ever does, I want it. I want him, he might feel seen in some bits, but I want him to be kind of happy with the overall thing and I think he will be. So.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, do you want to finish by reading our 6 feet? That'd be great.
Whoa, I will. I'll just find it. I know I got one of the words wrong before because I'm not wearing my glasses. Oops. As soon as I read it, I'm like, that's a weird word choice. Cool. So this one is based on a kaitahu motiatia, manutitia, and it also is about my dad's time working as a gravedigger and that skill that he would kind of bring into other times in our family where those sorts of jobs wanted to be done. And it includes some kind of language from like the grave symbol language because I spent a lot of time around graveyard and know quite a bit of that kind of language. So the lamb for a children's grave, clasped hands, whoever dies first pulls the other one up in a cup. And there's some really interesting ones too. My favourite one is the column. So there's people often think they've been vandalised, but it'll be a column sliced in half, which is like a big prestigious life cut short, or just a life cut short, but it's often for people quite high standing in their communities. And there's so
that's really interesting that there's that much meaning in them.
Yeah, it was a real and overseas ones like Victorian ones are really awesome because we don't really have many things like that here. But they were just really death obsessed during the Victorian time. There's crazy, there's whole languages. There's the flower languages are used as a lot, and we have that too. So you'll see rosemary engraved on some and things for remembrance and other things like that. But yeah, it's quite an interesting one. Cool. Yeah. So yeah, this is 6 feet for a single, 8 feet for a double, and I'll try to do some playing too. My father leaves school to dig graves. The first break is the hardest. The pressure of foot on steel, the smell of earth rising. Koia, koia, etoi, koia. The men sit with packed lunches, talking about the weather, next to holes they have dug themselves. When he leaves the job, he keeps his shovel. Always comes home to dig for the whānau. Koia, koia, etoi, koia. He keeps me playing graveside, tells me off for climbing the pile of earth, sends me to find things, the grave with the lamb, the grave with the clasped hands. He says this is how the dead speak, a lamb for a child, clasped hands pulling each other up to heaven. But this is not the only way. The atmosphere traps us in our bodies, holds our teeth and tongues in place. My father says he has no rhythm, but when he digs, you see it in his body. The flow through the earth into the feet, contracting the calves, through the spine to chiseled arms, through aging hands into the shovel and back into the whenua. Koia, koia, etoi, koia. With each beat, he piles up dirt higher and higher, making a lofty mountain for us to bow to.
Oh, kia ora mo tēnā. That's beautiful.
Mm.
Oh,
Mm.
Mm.
Mm. Oh, well, thank you.
Sorry,
No,
It's so
Right,
cool.
doing it.
I'm off the page. It's like, I don't know, it's like another language of this music just sort of on top of it again. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's so nice being able to do things live, and I was really lucky with that one because it was part of Best New Zealand Poems this year, and for last year I think that Hera Lindsay Bird picked, and they got me to do a recording of like a soundtrack for it as well. So that's on the Best New Zealand Poems website. It was recorded at Braeburn Studios, so it's got a Tangapūro track in the background. It was really neat to have that.
Yeah.
You should link to that as well then.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been amazing. I mean, I feel like we could keep talking to you for ages, but you've got a life to go to.
yeah, I'm going to go for a swim, I think, hopefully.
Nice.
Cool.
But yeah,
Nice.
so thanks heaps for having me. It's been so lovely having a chat, and look forward to seeing it.
Yeah. Thank you very much too.
Yeah. Thank you
Great.
so much.
Yeah.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.